Hey guys, I hope everyone is doing well. I just recently had a new release, the track called Over Control, and it was released on Afterlife. That means the new track, and we have the new breakdown, right? First of all, I have to say the track was fully produced, mixed and mastered by me. That means by watching this video you will see the whole production process. How did I produce, how did I mix, and what kind of settings I did use on the final stage to deliver this track to all the music platforms. As usually, we start from the top, and one by one I will show you every track, every MIDI track, every audio track. So let's break it down. First of all, at the very top I have a MIDI track called the Latency Fix. This is the MIDI signal, MIDI clip, with some notes in here, and these notes send the MIDI information to my Asilas Megascope, and this way I'm able to see my kick drum is perfectly aligned to the bars. It's just a better way to visually see what's going on inside the track, because if everything moves to the right, and this way the waveform, for example, of the last kick drum could be moved to this part, and I can see only the half. So visually just a better representation, and this is the way how we fix the Ableton's plugin delay compensation. The next one, I have a sidechain. This is the sample, and this is exactly the same sample which I use for the kick drum. Talking about the sidechain, there is nothing really interesting and special. Let's right away go to the kick drum. The kick drum, because this track I'm probably started to produce the last year in 2024, somewhere in the middle of summer, if I remember correct. I did use some samples in combination with the Kick Ninja. Now I'm completely switched to the Kick Ninja, because in my opinion this is the best plugin on the market if you want to make your own kick drums, if you want to mix your kick drums with the samples and all that stuff, so be sure to check that out. But in this case I have a sample, and the only one thing I did is to be sure the kick drum is playing in the middle. I did it mono, and I'm changing the polarity, so I'm basically flipping the face of the whole kick drum, and that was probably made to have a better relationship of the kick drum and the bass line. The next plugin I have is a Pro Q. I'm reducing a little bit of boxy frequencies, which is in this case at 590 Hz. At the same time, I'm reducing a couple frequencies at about 4000 Hz, and I'm reducing the very high frequencies, usually are coming from the click sound, at 14K. So that's it. Next plugin is called Punctuate. At the moment where I'm reducing the high frequencies with the EQ, I didn't feel the click sound of the kick drum sits well in the mix, and I decided to don't add another EQ and reduce even more high frequencies, but I decided to reduce the transient information from the kick drum. In this case, you can see the transient lengths. I set it up at 6 milliseconds. That means we are gonna work with the very short amount of the information, and by default the transient emphasis was at 50%, and I'm basically reducing this. And if I play the track solo, and by moving this parameter you can find the perfect position for the attack, for the transient of your kick drum when it starts sounding perfect inside your mix. That's it with this plugin. The next one, I have a filter automated in some part of the track. There's all the automation with the high pass and the low pass filters, and utility where I'm automated the volume and the breakdown. So the kick drum with all the processing, it sounds like this. The next sound, which is in the same group with the kick drum, is the snare. I did use a couple layers for the snare. The main layer is the sample. It sounds like this. I think it's already a very punchy sample to use. The processing, I'm applied the Pro Q, where I'm reducing the tone of the snare. Actually reduce it a lot, minus 10 dB, but at the same time my kick drum has a lot of information and low mid, so I don't want the snare drum fighting for the space in this frequency range with the kick drum. The next plugin I use always for my snare drums, it's a manual adjustment of the phase. I can rotate the phase the way I want by changing this parameter. I find the position where the snare drum and the kick drum start sounding best together, and also the position where the peak information of these two signals are playing together is on its minimum. So that means I will save some headroom for my final clipper and then to the limiter. Moving on, I have another plugin. In this case, I'm boosted the high frequencies of the snare drum from 12K by 3.5 dB, and at the same time I'm attenuate the same frequencies by 2 dB. Another tool I usually use is a clipper, because most of the time snare drum has a very strong attack, and usually I reduce this attack with the clippers. If I listen it solo, it will play only the information which was reduced. Alright, the next one is an ozone, where I manually try to adjust the side information of the snare drum. I'm basically increasing the side information in this part, so I didn't touch the tone of the snare. The next plugin is an reverb. This is the reverb I mostly use for the snare drums. The amount of 6%, this is more than enough just to place the snare drum in some kind of room. The room size is very short, is 0.4, and the pre-delay, which is also important in these transient sounds, so I don't blur the transient with having the pre-delay at 0. I give it some space, and usually I'll set up the pre-delay from 10 to 15 milliseconds. And the last stage here, I have a utility where I'm basically just increasing the volume by 2 dB. The layer for the snare drum is just the noise, and this slightly increased the length of the kick drum. And if I play these two sounds together, and on the group I have a UAD API compressor which works in the parallel. Which in this case increase the tail of the snare drum and push it slightly forward in the mix. And the snare drum and the kick drum are in the same group called drums. In this group I have only the clipper. You can see it catch the transient only when the kick drum and the snare drum are playing together. Usually I try to keep it at about -3 dB, because for example, if I would try to push it even more forward, I will start to hear distortion, because the part of the kick drum, especially the low part of the kick drum, starts getting inside the clipper. It will cause me the distortion. Okay, moving on, the next part, I have a snare rolls. Basically, this is just a couple of different samples, and as you can see, here is the sample for the first snare roll with the dangerous EQ, where I'm decreasing the high frequencies. I'm slightly cut it down, but I really like the slope of this EQ. It doesn't cut it like very hard, and to me it sounds very musical, very natural. Sometimes I've used this EQ for the individual instruments as well. I have a volume automation, another support snare drum, which is also a sample. OG Kashmir sample library, probably everyone had. In this case, I'm boosted the high frequencies and reduced the low frequencies, and the same volume automation, which is happening in the breakdown. Snare roll number 3, I use it only in the breakdown. Without even playing this, I can already see only the waveform and tell you this snare drum has a lot of noise information, and in this case I'm again reducing the high frequencies. I have an automation, and the last snare roll I have it mostly on the transition parts, where I have a drop, and one part of the drop have to have a transition to another one. So the snare rolls really helps to do that. And Pro Q, we are slightly boosted the tone of the snare and the highs. No automation. And the ozone, where I'm increasing the sides information and made it slightly wider. So if I play some of the parts of the snare rolls, As you can hear in this part, at the beginning of the MIDI clip, we have a slightly different patterns. And at the end, they start playing together. In this case, they're also playing the different patterns. And at the climax they play together, which is usually makes the transition and the part of this track even more excited. On the group I have a decapitator, and it slightly changed the tonal balance of the snare drum and added some more high information, and the reverb plugin with the same settings like I had on the main snare drum. Okay, next part I have a group with the tops, and the first hi-hat sounds like this. Very nice and very tight closed hi-hat. For the processing I'm only reducing the high frequencies, and with the clipper I'm controlling the transient. The second layer sounds like this. You can hear the difference. This sound is more gritty, it's more noisy. I'm added this to have a bit more texture, and as you can see I'm pitched down this sound and I have a fade in, so this way I'm pretty sure this layer will not mess up the transient of the first closed hi-hat. And if I play them together, there sounds like a pretty decent offbeat hi-hat. The next two sounds, I have a 16th hi-hat. This is basically the same sample. The only difference you can see, this is my very old technique. If I have to duplicate one sound and pan one sound to the right and one sound to the left, in this case I usually reduce the length of one sound. You can see it right here. This is the length of the second head, and this is the length of the first head. And by having these small changes of one sound from another one, our ears are very able to hear this difference. And especially, I didn't have this move in this case, but usually I have a transposition also slightly different. For example, this hi-hat could be transposed down by 2 semitones, and the next hi-hat could be transposed down by 1 semitone. And by doing this, we are adding even more difference to these two sounds. For the processing, I'm using the kickstart, where I'm reducing the part where the hi-hat and the kick drum are playing together. I didn't really want to mess up my click of the kick drum, so that's why I'm reducing this part. I have a Pro Q where I'm probably try to reduce some annoying frequencies. You could probably see some peaks in this area. I'm reducing the highs and the lows. Also, I'm applied the clipper. And with the utility, I made it mono. I didn't want to have any side information in these channels. Alright, the next one I have a percussion, and I don't see any processing on this audio track. I don't remember, did I use the loop or is it was the loop I made myself and then I applied the processing and freezed this out and use it as an audio track just to save some CPU. But yeah, this percussion adds some atmosphere on the background. Another layer, it's called noise. And these kind of loops I usually put to add some kind of atmosphere, touch of dirtiness in a good way. And for the processing, I'm using the Pro Q, where I'm completely remove almost the low mid information and the lows. I'm reducing some frequencies at 10K and reducing some high frequencies from 16K. Then I'm applied the SUS. which is, to be honest, completely killed all the transients from the loop. But that was actually the point, because I didn't want the transients from this loop somehow overlap or interfere with the transients of my hi-hats. And the last plugin is the sidechain, where I did the same move as I did on the 16 hi-hats to give some more space to the click of the kick drum sound. Next part is the modular percussion. In this case, I'm using the frequency shifter to pitch down the whole sound of this loop. I think it works way more better if I would do the same in this part, because I think by doing it this way, you really degrade your audio information. So that's why I did it with the frequency shifter. The next plugin is the ProQ, reduces the highs to keep some space for the hi-hats and reduces some lows. Sidechain, clipper, slightly catching the picks, and the delay. Very short one, I use it at 8% with the very small feedback. And all these sounds are coming to the tops group. On the group processing, I have an API compressor, and with this parallel option, I'm slightly mixing just to add the character of this compressor to the whole group. And emphasize the transients even more. The next plugin, which is the tape. With this plugin, I usually increase the high frequencies in this part, and if we have a listen, I don't really push the signal to its extreme, but at the same time it also adds some character to the sound. And because I'm adding the high frequencies, at the same time I'm adding the presence to the whole percussion and the hi-hats group. The next plugin, it's an Oxford inflator. With this plugin I'm increase the perceived loudness of the whole group. Alright, next one, it's a Speccraft. So dynamically, I'm controlled this area where I could probably have some harsh, and because there is the stack of the hi-hats and the stack of the percussion, sometimes it's like another layer of the processing. I'm polish the sound even more. At the same time, I have a clipper. Where I do control the transients, and the last part I have a filter. I'm using it only once at the section where I have a transition in the first breakdown. By closing the low pass filter, I'm basically fade away the sounds of the tops. And that's it for this part, and I think it's time to move on, and now we are in the low end territory, and let's start with the low bass.